Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. My name is Dr. Faiz Pasha. I'm resident in urology. Today the topic of presentation is lithotripsy and my moderator is Dr. Baz Jafri. So we'll be discussing about stone fragmentation today. As we all know that there are two main types of lithotripsy, extracorporeal, in which the shock waves are generated outside the body, and intracorporeal, in which the stone fragmentation is achieved with the help of endoscopes. The concept of using shock wave to fragment stone was noted in 1950 in Russia. Dornier, a German aircraft corporation, discovered that shock waves originating from passing debris in the atmosphere can crack something that is hard. Shockwave lithotripsy revolutionized kidney and ureteric stone treatment. The great advantage of shockwave lithotripsy is its ease of administration, the absence of any requirement for GA, and its low complication rates. The first clinical application with successful fragmentation of renal calculi was in 1980. The HM1 human model 1 lithotripta underwent modifications in 1982, leading to the HM2 and finally to the widespread application of HM3 in 1983. Here we can see the human model 1 machine. We can also appreciate the large water tub, and the size of the machine is very huge as it occupies the whole room. The Dornier HM3 was the first lithotripter to be widely utilized in clinical practice. It is a device that features a large water bath for optimum shockwave coupling, fluoroscopic imaging, an ellipsoid reflector with a small aperture, and an electrohydraulic shockwave generator. Shockwave sources have evolved over time. There are currently three types of shockwave generators: electrohydraulic, electromagnetic, and piezoelectric. We'll see them one by one. Application of a high voltage electrical current between two electrodes about 1 millimeter apart under water causes discharge of a spark. Water around the tip of the electrode is vaporized by high temperature, resulting in a rapidly expanding gas bubble. The rapid expansion and then the rapid collapse of this bubble generates a shock wave that is focused by a metal reflector shaped as a hemi-ellipsoid, using the original Dornier HM3 lithotripter. We can see in the picture the F1 is the point at the ellipsoid, and the shock waves are generated at this point and reflected and focused at F2, which is the point at the stone in the kidney. For the shock waves to be focused onto a calculus, the electrode is placed at one focus determined F1 of an ellipsoid, and the target, the kidney stone, is placed at the other focus termed F2. Disadvantages are the substantial pressure fluctuations from shock to shock and a relatively short electrode life. As far as the electromagnetic generators are concerned, there are two electrically conducting cylindrical plates, and they are separated by a thin membrane of insulating material. Passage of an electrical current through the plates generates a strong magnetic field between them, the subsequent movement of which generates a shock wave. The energy in the shock wave is concentrated onto the target by focusing it within a Gaussian lens. The advantages are the introduction of energy into the patient's body over a large skin area, which may cause less pain. Here in the diagram we can see that there is a lens which focuses the shock waves that have been generated at the same point, which is termed as F2. In the piezoelectric generator, there is a spherical dish which is covered with about 3000 small ceramic elements, each of which expands rapidly when a high voltage is applied across them. This rapid expansion generates a shock wave. The piezoelectric elements are usually placed inside of a spherical dish to permit convergence of the shock front. Piezoelectric generators result in the generation of shock waves by non-linear propagation. The advantages include the focusing accuracy, a long service life, and the possibility of an anesthetic-free treatment because of the relatively low energy density at the skin entry point of the shock wave. So there are basically three imaging systems. It can be fluoroscopy alone, ultrasonography, and the combination of both. All three have their advantages and disadvantages. As far as the advantages of fluoroscopy are concerned, it has its familiarity to the most urologists, the ability to visualize radiopaque calculi throughout the urinary tract, the ability to use iodinated contrast agents to aid in stone localization, and the ability to display anatomic details. But the disadvantages are the exposure of the staff and patient to ionizing radiation, the high maintenance demands of the equipment, the inability to visualize radiolucent calculi without the use of radiographic contrast agents. When we use ultrasonography alone, there are also advantages, as it is inexpensive to manufacture and to maintain compared with fluoroscopic systems. treatment of children and infants when one is concerned about the dose of ionizing radiation, and they can localize slightly opaque or non-opaque calculi. Some disadvantages: ultrasonography requires a high trained operator. It is almost impossible to view a stone in areas such as middle third of the ureter or when there is an indwelling ureteral catheter. Once a stone is fragmented, it is difficult to identify each individual stone piece. In some cases of combining ultrasonography and fluoroscopy for stone localization are clearly advantageous, but each system has a drawback that limits one of the functions of the system. So in this picture we can see a typical shock wave. A typical pressure pulse at the lithotripta focus F2 has a steep positive pressure front of about 40 megapascals. That is followed by a negative pressure of 10 megapascals. This entire pulse lasts for a duration of 4 microseconds, and the ratio of the positive to negative peak pressure is approximately 5:1. Keep in mind that we are discussing about the point F2. F2 is the point at which the stone is focused in the kidney, and the initial peak pressure is, there is a steep positive pressure of 40 megapascals initially, which is followed by a negative pressure of minus 10 megapascals, and all this duration of this pressure wave lasts for about 4 microseconds. So now we'll discuss something about fragmentation. Safe shock wave dosage is unknown. Shock wave induced trauma including intrarenal and perirenal hemorrhage and edema, and thus the minimal shocks needed to achieve fragmentation should be given. Determination of adequate fragmentation during treatment may be difficult. Initial sharp edges become fuzzy or blurred. Stones that were initially visualized may disappear after successful fragmentation. Intermittent visualization ensures accurate focusing and assessment of the progress and eventual termination of the procedure. We should keep in mind that if we are posted or we are performing duty in the lithotripsy department where the patient stone has been focused, so we have to continuously monitor the stone. It is not like that we set the focus and we can leave or we can take time, but we have to give time and we have to intermittently visualize the stone so that the accurate focusing can be managed. Fragmentation is achieved by erosion and shattering. Cavitational forces result in erosion at the entry and exit sites of the shock waves. Shattering results from energy absorption with stress, strain, and shear forces. Here in the picture we can see that the maximum force and the gravitational forces are more accurate and more hardly being applied at the entry and the exit points where the maximum fragmentation is taking place. And there are initially micro cracks which ultimately coalesce to form the fragmentation, and the whole of the stone is fragmented. So what is spallation? Once the shock wave enters the stone, it will be reflected at sites of impedance mismatch. One such location is at the distal surface of the stone at the stone fluid interface. As the shock wave is reflected, it is inverted in phase to a tensile negative wave. If the tensile wave exceeds the tensile strength of the stone, there is an induction of micro cracks that eventually coalesce, resulting in stone fragmentation, which is termed as spallation. Squeezing, splitting, or circumferential compression. The shock wave advances faster through the stone than in the fluid outside the stone, which means that the higher the density, the faster the traveling of the shock wave takes place. It produces circumferential force on the stone, resulting in a tensile stress that is at its maximum at the proximal and distal ends of the stone. So energy ramping. What is ramping? Ramping is actually we increase the energy slowly and gradually so as to achieve the maximum stone-free rate and to decrease the perineal hematomas. Ramping up the energy voltage of the device rather than beginning at the maximum energy is one way to minimize the risk of tissue injury and potentially improve stone breakage. It conditions the kidney with initial vasoconstriction, leading to renal stiffness and decreased blood flow. One in vitro study that had superior fragmentation compared to serially decreasing voltages started with 100 shocks at 12.3 kilovolts, then escalated to 14.8 kilovolts for 400 shocks, followed by 15.8 kilovolts for 1600 shocks. So what is coupling? Maximizing energy delivery to the stone can be achieved by proper coupling of the shockwave lithotripsy generator head to the patient in an airtight manner, with minimization of gas bubbles in the coupling media. Failure to recognize breaks in coupling can result in unsuccessful stone fragmentation. So we have to make sure that the patient is in close contact with the generator head so that maximum coupling can be achieved. There are various factors which influence the stone fragmentation that are influenced with coupling. So the factors are the type of shockwave lithotripsy machine, the gel used at the patient generator interface, preferably the gel should be of large quantity and the gel should be of lower viscosity. Method of gel application, it is best to apply the gel first to the shock head and then the patient should be asked to lay on the generator head. And the patient factors, we should also make sure that the patient does not move a lot during the procedure so that coupling could not be damaged. So what are the indications? The AUA Stone Guidelines panel has classified ESWL as a potential first-line treatment for ureteral and renal stones smaller than 2 centimeters. If it's a non-lower pole renal calculus and if it's greater than 2 centimeters, it is clear cut that we have to go for PCNL. But if it's less than 1 centimeters, then shockwave lithotripsy is indicated. The gray zone is between the 1 and 2 centimeters. So then we have to look for two parameters, the Hounsfield units. If it's less than 1000 and the skin to stone distance is greater than 10 centimeters, then shockwave lithotripsy is the preferred choice. On the other hand, if the Hounsfield units are greater than 1000 and the stone comes out to be cystine or bruchite stone, which we know are harder and difficult to fragment, and the stone to skin distance is greater than 10 centimeters, then compared to shockwave lithotripsy, ureteroscopy is a preferable option. And if in case ureteroscopy fails, then we can go for PCNL, of course. Symptomatic lower pole renal calculus, again, if the stone size is greater than 2 centimeters, the PCNL is the preferred choice. For stones between 1 and 2 centimeters, we have to see if PCNL is contraindicated or not. For example, due to some spinal abnormality, due to spine deformity, or could be due to difficult anatomy or any bleeding diathesis. If PCNL is contraindicated, then ureteroscopy can be opted. But if the stone is less than 1 centimeter, then again 3 categories, 3 parameters should be followed. If the Hounsfield units are less than 1000 and the skin to stone distance is less than 10 centimeters and the anatomy is favorable, then we can go for shockwave lithotripsy. But if the Hounsfield units are greater than 1000 and stone to skin distance is greater than 10 centimeters and there is unfavorable anatomy, which we know is if the infundibulopelvic angle is greater than 45 and if the length of the infundibulum or the length of the calyx is greater than 2.5 centimeters, then this is unfavorable anatomy and we should not go for lithotripsy in the lower pole calculus, but should go for ureteroscopy in this case. Now coming towards contraindications, there are some absolute and some relative contraindications. Absolute contraindications include pregnancy, uncorrected blood clotting disorders, known renal artery stenosis, acute UTI or urosepsis, uncorrected obstruction distal to the stone, and any abdominal aortic aneurysm. Relative contraindications include uncontrolled hypertension, morbid obesity, renal ectopy or malformation, renal insufficiency, and cardiac pacemakers. There are few parameters that affect the outcome of shockwave lithotripsy, and keeping those parameters into consideration, we can enhance the post-operative stone-free status of the patient. So the patient selection plays an important role, and there are a few factors to consider. They include body habitus, stone burden, anatomical location, stone density that can be measured by a non-contrast CT, and skin to stone distance. We'll look into them one by one. Body habitus. Poor outcomes for shockwave lithotripsy have been attributed to obesity. Appropriately positioning patients with high body mass index BMI to target the stone can be challenging, as the focal length of most lithotripters is in the 15 centimeter range. Ackerman and colleagues' multivariate analysis reported finding that BMI was a significant negative predictor of a stone-free outcome following shockwave lithotripsy. Any gross skeletal abnormalities, contractures, or excessive weight greater than 300 pounds may severely limit or preclude lithotripsy. Stone burden. Stone burden plays a significant role in predicting the outcome of shockwave lithotripsy, even for patients with non-staghorn calculi. As the stone size increases, the likelihood of a successful outcome decreases. So it's not preferable for larger stones, obviously more than 2 centimeters, to go for shockwave lithotripsy as first option. EAU and AUA guidelines do not recommend shockwave lithotripsy as primary treatment for stones larger than 2 centimeters in size. Stone composition. Stones of differing composition vary widely with regard to their fragility. Calcium hydrogen phosphate brucite, cysteine, and calcium oxalate monohydrate stones (COM) are the most resistant stones to ESWL. Joseph and colleagues reported a significantly reduced stone-free rate of 54.5% with shockwave lithotripsy for calculi greater than 1000 Hounsfield units. So this shows that if the Hounsfield units of the stone is greater than 1000, so it's not preferable to go for lithotripsy as the stone-free rate is less than 50, is approximately 50% in these cases. In contrast, they found a 100% success rate if the stones were less than 500 Hounsfield units. For stones between 500 and 1000 Hounsfield units, the clearance rate was 85.7%. So, what is the triple D score? Recently, Parikh and colleagues developed CT-based matrices as a scoring system. The triple D score incorporates three matrices: stone density, stone volume dimensions, and skin to stone distance to augment the prediction of shockwave lithotripsy treatment outcome. They established cutoffs of less than 150 microliters for ellipsoid stone volume, less than 12 centimeters for skin to stone distance, and less than 600 Hounsfield units for stone density. So, if these three parameters can be kept into consideration, the chances of stone-free rate post-operatively are greater. So, whenever a patient comes to us and we have to categorize the patient as to which modality of stone fragmentation we should opt, so we should look into these three things. First is stone density, second is stone volume, the stone bulk, and third is the skin to stone distance. So a triple D score of 0, 1, 2, and 3 correlated with shockwave lithotripsy success rates of 21.4%, 41.3%, and 78.7% and 96.1% respectively. Stone location. It is also a very important parameter to keep into consideration, as we've already discussed that if the stone is in the pelvis or in the middle or upper calyx, the chance of ESWL post ESWL stone free rate is greater. But if the stone is in the lower calyx and if it's greater than 1 centimeter, then we should not go for ESWL as first choice. There are other options, for example, flexible ureteroscopy or PCNL, that are better for lower pole stones. So stone location is an influential factor for the outcome of shockwave lithotripsy. Attaining a stone-free status with lower pole calculi, even if fragmentation occurs, can be challenging. Infundibulopelvic angle plus infundibular width and length are anatomical factors that can alter the success rate for treatment of lower pole calculi with shockwave lithotripsy. In order to decide for ESWL treatment of a lower pole stone, the favorable factors should exist. So there we have to count it on our fingers. There are three favorable factors that can lead to post-operatively better stone-free rates. For example, if the infundibulopelvic angle is greater than 45 degrees, the chance of stone clearance is greater. And if the infundibular length is less than 2.5 millimeters, the chance of stone clearance is greater. And again, if the width of the infundibulum is greater than 5 millimeters, then the chance of stone clearance is greater. So these three anatomical factors should be kept into consideration before going for lithotripsy, if it's a lower pole stone, mind you. The unique clinical scenario of calyceal diverticula is a controversial topic when discussing appropriateness of shockwave lithotripsy. Here in the diagram, we can see that there is a stone in the diverticulum, and as we all know that the neck of the diverticulum is by default very narrow. So even if you achieve 100% fragmentation of the stone, the chances of the clearance of stone from the diverticulum are very thimble. The neck of diverticulum is classically quite narrow. Consequently, it can be quite challenging to fragment the stone enough to get clearance of all or any of the pieces. One study reported that there was 21% clearance after the calyceal diverticular stone were fragmented. So how to optimize the shockwave lithotripsy outcome? Wider focal width increases the likelihood of stone breakage because the kidney tends to move. As a consequence of respiratory motion, the stone may move in and out of narrow focal zone. Optimal coupling permits the efficient transfer of energy from the lithotripter to the patient. Poor coupling will reduce stone breakage. As we have already discussed that coupling should be proper and there should not be any air specks between the gel that should be applied over the generator head. Most commonly, energy transfer through a coupling medium is attenuated by air pockets in the coupling interface itself. Studies suggest that shockwave lithotripsy at 60 to 90 shocks per minute result in better fragmentation when compared to 120 shocks per minute, particularly for larger stones. So this is an important point, that the rate of shock should be low. If it's at the 120 shocks per minute, then the stone free rates post-operatively are less. But if the rate is minimized, for example, if it's 60 to 90 shocks per minute, the chances of fragmentation are better and stone pulverization will be better as compared to 120 shocks. Decrease the energy setting on the machine, increasing the power setting on most electromagnetic lithotripters actually narrows the focal zone, which decreases the stone breakage. So this stone breakage is correlated with the focal zone. Increasing the power setting on most electromagnetic lithotripters actually narrows the focal zone, and if the focal zone is narrowed, then the chances of stone breakage are decreased, and it may also increase the risk of renal injury. Anesthesia. Topical agents, example Imla cream, a mixture of lidocaine and prilocaine, has been shown to reduce anesthesia requirements during SWL. Imla cream should be applied at least 45 minutes before shockwave lithotripsy. Children and extremely anxious individuals may be served best by general anesthesia. Patients who received general anesthesia experienced a significantly greater stone-free rate than did those patients who underwent intravenous sedation. Possible explanation for this is the more controlled respiratory excursion that is conferred by the general anesthetic. So, what is Saint-Strasser? As we know that post lithotripsy, there are chances of the fragmentation that they accumulate at the distal end of the ureter, which can appear as a stone street, which is also known as a lead fragment. So this here in the diagram we can see that there is a linear application of stones in the distal ureter, which gives the impression of a stone street, which is known as Steinstrasse. Incidence of Steinstrasse stone street is 2 to 3% for stones, 1.5 to 2 centimeters in diameter, and 56% for stones 3 to 3.5 centimeters. Steinstrasse is managed expectantly since 50% will resolve spontaneously, with shockwave lithotripsy of so-called lead fragment or ureteroscopy being required where stones fail to pass. If Steinstrasse does not resolve, retrograde endoscopic manipulation is required. What is the fate of clinically insignificant fragment after lithotripsy? Actually, clinically insignificant is a misnomer, as 12 to 46% of such fragments will increase in size over a period of 2 to 3 years. And clinically insignificant, the cutoff value is given as 4 millimeters in size or less. Post-operative care. Patients should be encouraged to maintain an active ambulatory status to facilitate stone passage. And obviously, fluid intake should be encouraged. And as we prescribe post-operatively, post-lithotripsy, patients should be asked to use at least alpha blocker for 14 days so that the residual and the fragmented stones can pass per urethra. Severe pain unresponsive to routine intravenous or oral medication should alert the physician for perirenal hematomas. In such a situation, CT scan should then be undertaken to stage the injury. Now coming towards some recent technical innovations. Wide focal zone shockwave generators. Evidence indicates that a wide focal zone provides more efficient fragmentation, while high peak pressures, high energy flux densities result in increased tissue injury. Improvements to the design of acoustic lens of a contemporary electromagnetic lithotripter resulted in the enlargement of the focal zone and significantly less trauma and superior fragmentation. So the focal zone shall be enlarged, as we've seen in the modern day electromagnetic lithotripters, which result in less trauma and superior fragmentation rates are achieved. Dual pulse lithotripter. Distributing the shock wave energy onto two applicators is the basis for dual EHL system. Twin sources can be operated so that the shock waves are fired simultaneously, synchronous or simultaneous mode, or in sequence, alternating mode. Since this method can manipulate the acoustic field, it also has the potential to improve stone breakage. Some future ideas. Recently, a similar concept utilizing high-intensity focused ultrasound histotripsy with an electrohydraulic lithotripter demonstrated a significant reduction in fragmentation time in vitro. Harper and Associates developed an innovative technique that utilizes short bursts of focused ultrasonic pulses to transcutaneously reposition stones within the renal collecting system and ureter. Future applications include repositioning stones prior to treatment, expediting the expulsion of residual fragments following ureteroscopy or shockwave lithotripsy, and moving the obstructing UPJ stones into the kidney to alleviate the acute renal colic episode. So now we've completed the extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy.
Coming towards the intracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy, in which endoscopic instruments are used to fragment the stones. There are basically, as we all know, four techniques that are available for intracorporeal lithotripsy. Two of them are flexible, which include electrohydraulic lithotripsy and laser lithotripsy, and two of them are rigid, which include ultrasonic and the ballistic lithotripsy. We'll look into them one by one. Electrohydraulic lithotripsy mechanism. The first technique developed for intracorporeal lithotripsy was electrohydraulic lithotripsy. A high voltage applied across a concentric electrode underwater generates a spark. This vaporizes water, and the subsequent expansion and collapse of the gas bubble generates a shock wave. The shock wave is not focused, so the electrohydraulic lithotripsy probe must be applied within 1 millimeter of the stone to optimize the stone fragmentation. So this electrohydraulic lithotripsy mechanism is most commonly used in the fragmentation of the bladder calculi, as there are more chances of trauma to the urothelium, so it's not a preferred option for ureters. Advantages of EHL. EHL will successfully fragment 90% of the stones. Least costly intracorporeal device. Disadvantages are EHL can give more ureteric perforation, so it's dangerous. Retrograde propulsion of the calculi and fragments, there are chances for those, and fragment size are larger as compared to the laser fragments. Laser lithotripsy. Laser is an acronym for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Stimulation of atoms by external energy source cause the electrons to get excited, and those excited electrons release energy in the form of photons. So it is coherent, means all photons are in phase with one another. It is collimated, means that photons travel parallel to each other, and they are monochromatic, means all photons have the same wavelength. The holmium laser. The most effective lithotripsy system for flexible ureteroscopy is holmium YAG laser. The holmium laser is a solid-state laser system, wavelength of 2140 nanometers in the pulsed mode, absorbed superficially, which results in superficial cutting or ablation. Mechanism of action primarily through a photothermal mechanism that causes stone vaporization. There are many advantages of holmium YAG laser. Few of them are: it transmits energy through a flexible laser, fragment all stones regardless of any composition, may it be a hard stone or any soft stone with any attenuation values, safely activated at a distance of 0.5 to 1 millimeters from the ureteral wall, one of the safest and most effective and most versatile, significantly smaller fragments, weak shock wave which reduces the likelihood of retropulsion of the stone, perforation and stricture rate is 1 to 2%, no productive eye wear required, that is, it can be used up to 10 centimeters safe distance, ready for use within a minute of turning on the machine, and there is minimal maintenance that is required. Dusting and pop dusting. Dusting is the utilization of higher frequency and low power energy settings to break stones into sub-millimeter fragments for spontaneous passage without the need for basket retrieval. It involves using a low energy beam first to break down the soft outer shell of the stone. Once it has reduced in size, the laser is switched to a higher frequency to pop the hard center into tiny pieces, which can then pass through the urine. So this diagram, which shows dusting, fragmentation, and popcorn effect, was once, you can remember, shared in the infographics group. Most recent generation of laser generators have enabled the possibility of dusting technique. Dusting avoids the use of basket as stone fragments are spontaneously evacuated. However, no consensus on the definition of dust currently exists. Popcorn lithotripsy. Popcorn lithotripsy yielded more sub-millimeter fragments when performed with the fiber position on the stone compared to 2 millimeters from the stone. Distribution of sub-millimeter fragments was higher when utilizing high frequencies regardless of pulse energy. So in the dusting, we can see that the pulse is long and the energy is low. However, the frequency is high. Whereas in the popcorning effect, the pulse is long, but the energy and frequency, both of them are high. So for popcorn lithotripsy, the energy setting and the frequency setting should be high. So the favorable factors for popcorn lithotripsy or the effective technique is the fiber should be placed over the stone, at the stone, and the higher frequency should be greater than 40 hertz, and for popcorn technique the short calyx is preferred. For ineffective technique, there is a large calyx. The frequency, if it's less than 20 hertz, it will be ineffective. And if the probe is kept 2 millimeters away or more than 2 millimeters away from the stone, then the popcorn technique will be ineffective. So, what is Muser's technology in laser? With Muser's technology, the laser pulse is modulated into two consecutive parts. The first part separates the water by creating a small vapor bubble, the Muser's effect, and then the remaining energy is transmitted via the vapor bubble towards the target. Here in the picture, we can see that in the regular holmium laser, there is only one pulse or one vapor that is transferred, whereas in the Muser's, there are two pulses or two vapors. First one goes and the second follows the other, which augments the shock, and there are more chances of the stone fragmentation. So this is latest Muser's laser holmium laser lithotripsy machine. So what is the difference between the Muser's effect and the Muser's technology? All the energy is delivered in one burst in the Muser's effect, and most of the energy is wasted in forming the bubble and absorbed by the water. Whereas in Muser's technology, the energy is delivered in two bursts. The first burst is used to form the bubble, and the second burst travels through the vapor, which obviously enhances the fragmentation capability of the shock waves. The Muser's technology resulted in more efficient laser lithotripsy in addition to the significantly reduced stone retropulsion. And obviously in Muser's technology, there are less chances of stone retropulsion and displayed a margin of safety that may result in shorter procedural time and safer lithotripsy. Rigid lithotripters, ballistic lithotripsy, which is also known as pneumatic lithotripsy. Ballistic lithotripsy relies on energy generated by the movement of a projectile. There is a jackhammer effect in which the flexible objects preserve the momentum of the energy, but inflexible objects such as a stone fragment on impact. Swiss lithoclast, the first ballistic lithotrite, the metal projectile in the handpiece is propelled by measured burst of compressed air against the head of the metal probe at a frequency of 12 cycles per second, and it utilizes the hospital central air supply or compressed air tank. We can see in the diagram that the size of the probe is between 1 to 3.5 millimeters, which is obviously very short, and there is a jackhammer effect which is finally responsible for the fragmentation of the stone and better stone free rates. Some advantages and disadvantages of ballistic lithotripsy. It is very effective with wide margin of safety, successful fragmentation of all compositions from 70 to 100%. It can be used with ultrasonic devices, significantly lower risk of ureteral perforation, relatively low cost and low maintenance. The probes have an extremely long lifespan. Disadvantages are it is rigid in nature, relatively high rate of stone retropulsion, reduced efficiency with semi-rigid ureteroscope, and bowing of the probe during lithotripsy results in significant power loss. Ultrasonic lithotripsy. Ultrasound probe works by applying electrical energy to excite a piezo-ceramic plate in the ultrasound transducer. Plate resonates at a specific frequency and generates ultrasonic waves at a frequency of 23,000 to 25,000 Hz, which causes the stone to break but causes minimal damage to the compliant urothelium. The technique is we have to trap the stone between the probe and the urothelium, and we should not push too hard to avoid perforation. And its principal use is in the fragmentation of renal calculi during PCNL. You can see the ultrasonic lithotripter with piezoceramic elements and its longitudinal vibration. So what is triology? It is a single probe device which delivers both ultrasonic and electromagnetic ballistic energy as well as suction capability. So there are three options available: ultrasonic, electromagnetic with the suction capability. Under surgeon control via a single foot pedal. Studies have suggested that triology offers faster stone clearance than other ultrasonic and combination ultrasonic devices. To conclude, in the era of minimally invasive surgery, ESWL, despite its age, still plays a role of primary relevance. For the properly selected patients, shockwave lithotripsy is a well-tolerated, non-invasive procedure that produces reasonable stone clearance of upper urinary tract calculi while offering low morbidity rates. Thank you.